Yes, guys, welcome back to another video. This one is going to be a little bit different today. I'm going to reveal to you my 3 midfield archetypes: the strike mid, the engine mid, and the disruptor mid.
Paul Francis just steamrolled his way through the stoppage.
Neil will its full pick up. As an AFL coach, already under some pressure. There's the ball round to Anderson.
This video is powered today by Deakin University, Australia's #1 sports science school for the last 3 years of running. I'm teaming up with Deakin in the lead up to this year's AFL draft to bring you even better videos. So as I was saying, I think in 2024, AFL midfields are working on the balance of 3 different archetypal mids. There's a heavily offensive mid that I'm calling here the strike midfielder. There's a pressure or defensively minded player that I'm calling the disruptor mid, or sometimes the anchor, and also like an all-encompassing sort of box-to-box, arc-to-arc, creative type midfielder that I am calling the engine. So essentially what I've gone through there are the positions that they're taking up on the field, but there are other things and reasons for why these players would get deployed in those roles in the first place. And the first one I've got here is the athletic and the physiological set. So speed, agility, power, endurance, vertical leap, height, and weight. They're sort of those natural things that why a player would get deployed in a certain role within that midfield. And the other is the football specific skills, like the understanding of the game, cleanliness, creativity with the hands, kicking skill, and there's even a lot more on top of that. So some combination of those sorts of skills will make you better suited to each one of these 3 archetypes that we're going to talk about today. I think if you're an AFL team playing in 2024 and you don't have the right balance of these 3 different types of midfielders, you could look a little bit disbalanced and a little bit one-paced. The reason that I've made this video and its relationship to this channel, which is, predominantly about the draft, I've mainly done it to try to understand the draftees that are coming through. And if we have a look at all of these things that, encompass their skill set, we can try to see where they actually are going to fit at AFL level. So I really hope this video helps with that. Okay, so let's get stuck in here with the first archetype, which I've got as it's the most common one. It is the engine midfielder, the enduro mid. This is what's going to largely make up your midfield group. Teams will have several types of this player, and they are extremely important due to their creativity and run that they give on the transition and from the stoppage sources. Now, the prototypical enduro mid, or some of the best ones I think we have at the AFL level, are Nick Dacos, Lachie Neale, Zach Butters, Caleb Serong, and Sam Walsh. Now, you'll notice with all those names that I said, you're looking at really smaller bodied type midfielders, usually sub 185 centimeters, and they are less physical type midfielders. They're players that rely on getting a large amount of loose balls as opposed to the hard ball gets or the more contested football where they have to use their body and their strength as they are a little bit smaller. They more rely on their high footy IQ, their creativity, the nous that they have around stoppage, and their speed and agility. Although potentially not powerful midfielders, they have that speed to be able to nip around, get the ball out, and create for other players. They're generally high time on ground midfielders because they do have that endurance base, that ability to repeat sprint, to go at high intensity effort for a long time. And their starting position within that midfield group, not necessarily at the centre bounce, but generally speaking across the entire field, they're going to go deep into defense. They're going to come forward. They're pretty much going to be all-encompassing across the entire field and just be involved in the most amount of play of any player on the field. Stats-wise, you're really looking at high disposal, a high amount of handball, moderate for meters gained at around 10 to 15 meters per disposal because of their handball rate. And as I said before, loose ball dominated, as they're not really relying on any strength or physicality there. So I'm going to bring up a case study here with 2 Fremantle mids who are both engine mids. So we're going to play a little bit of a game here. So you've got Serong and Brayshaw, who I think are the same type of midfielder. Now, there's nothing wrong with having 2 of these types in your midfield, particularly with an engine mid. I think they're the most versatile to be able to fulfill a wide variety of roles. Serong there, 30 disposals. That is classic territory for an engine mid. Brayshaw, 29, so pretty close there. Serong, 14 kicks, 16 handballs to Brayshaw's 13 kicks, 16 handballs. So just under 50% there with the kick to handball ratio, 13 meters per disposal to 12 meters per disposal. So as I said, moderate meters per disposal. Both of these guys, they're quick, but they're not absolutely rapid. They're quite agile type midfielders and really good around that stoppage area. And if you look at their sort of average field positions here, you've got 4.5 inside 50s for Sarong and 3.5 inside 50s for Brayshaw. So not an enormous amount. And if you went back to the rebound 50s, they'd be sitting somewhere around that just nice even mark for an even coverage across the entire field. Now, that was Freo's two engine mids that they've got there in Brayshaw and Sarong. Can you guess who the strike midfielder is going to be? Correct. It is Hayden Young, 24 disposals, so a little bit more modest than Brayshaw and Sarong, but he goes 14 kicks to 10 handballs. So it's that ratio in the other way. He wants to kick, go forward, take meters, 6 inside 50s where it was around 3.5 and 4.5 for Brayshaw. So he's a little bit more forward of center, 18 meters per disposal. So he's taking every touch that he gets is just a little bit more penetrative, a little bit more deep. And he also kicked 13 goals for the year. So he is the type of player that just, more importantly than any of this stuff, he uses that speed, he uses that bit of explosiveness that he has to go forward at any cost. And I think before he was in that midfield group, they did look a little bit one-paced. So he is fixing that equilibrium, that balance to make Fremantle a better team. And I reckon they're going to come back pretty strong in 2025. I'm going to sneak through here to the strike midfielders. Now, I think you're starting to probably understand where I'm going with this, which type of midfielder is the strike. This one is the rare type. So this one, you really need to rely on a lot of innate ability, a lot of genetics in some way with the muscle composition, the types of players that are really twitchy, really explosive and can burst through, open up the game and break that wall of, defensive. Inside that midfield group, there is that wall of defenders, those three midfielders that are trying to stop you get out the front. This player can do that to the best of their ability. You got to think of, players like Chris Judd, Dustin Martin, Patrick Dangerfield are sort of your old schoolers that take up this position. I would say the modern ones coming through at the moment that really exemplify this archetype. You've got Harley Reid, Christian Petrarca, and Jason Horne-Francis, I think, is one of the best exploitees of this type. They're usually a little bit taller, this type of midfielder. I think that's maybe inherent to the athletic type, usually around 185 centimeters plus, and they can be even taller than that. They're a bit massier, a little bit heavier, and that gives them that extra bit of power when they do get that speed going. Now, this is the most offensive midfielder within that group for sure. Fast twitch, explosive, high impact, decisive, direct, and short, sharp actions are what underpins what they're trying to do. And I mention those short, sharp actions because there is a greater degree of fatigue with these types of players. They put in so much physical exertion when they make those big explosive efforts that they do tend to fatigue a little bit more. They can run at a high intensity for a long time, and that's what sets these guys apart from just probably simply a forward half player, someone like a Jake Stringer that's that sort of powerful forward player. These guys can still run, but they will fatigue a little bit more and probably have to have a lower time on ground to kind of adapt to that. They kick a lot of goals, they have a lot of score involvements, and they're really, really penetrative. But I think the best thing I can say about the strike midfielder is that you have to be a total footballer because you have to have all of the nousy little things that you need to work and manipulate a clearance. But then you also have to have the athletic traits on it. So you have to be everything to everyone in this sense. Now, I think the player at the moment that best exemplifies this position is Jason Horne-Francis. I'm going to give a little comparison here between him and Zach Butters, who I would say is their engine midfielder. Now, Zach Butters, he goes at 27 disposals per game to Jason Horne-Francis' 22. So there's that. Again, that's just the manage minutes thing and the impact to disposal thing. Jason Horne-Francis kicks 70% of the time to Zach Butters 52% of the time. So there's that kick to handball ratio and the penetration and the directness to want to go forward. Rebound 50s for Horne-Francis, 0.9 to 1.6 for Zach Butters. So that just shows how much more defensively positioned Butters is on the field. Then you've got 4.8 inside 50s to 4.6, so marginally in favour of Horne-Francis. 17 metres per disposal to 15 metres per disposal, so Zach Butters a little bit more on that higher end for an engine mid, but Horne-Francis taking more metres per disposals. 2.7 shots at goal to 1.3, the forward half player, and 27 goals to 13. Horne-Francis also has a lot of one-on-ones that he's able to win, use his strength, use his power inside 50 to be able to hit the scoreboard a little bit more. So, as I said, the only downside of this type of player is it'd be difficult to have your entire midfield made up of strike-type midfielders with that athletic profile, carrying that extra bit of fatigue, that little bit of extra injury risk as well, I would say. And only being able to, in some ways, use them a little bit more sparingly inside that midfield group. You need the engine midfielders to underpin what they're doing, but you've got to get the balance right. The third and final archetype here is the Disruptor anchor midfielder, the most offensive, probably the least quality, definitely the least quality on the ball would be this archetype. The first place I go to think about here is the Port Adelaide midfield again. You've got Zach Butters, Connor Rozee, Horne-Francis. Ken Hinckley and the coaching team never want to play those three midfielders together. They always want Willem Drew there being that defensive anchor, someone with a bit more stability that just does the role and makes sure he doesn't push forward and cheat on the attacking side and gives them that just little bit of defensive stability at the back. I think this position has a high degree of variability with the playing attributes, but they do tend to be a bit of a bigger bodied midfielder. So you can get that mass and extra strength into the midfield, to that inside game, and you don't have to add that to any of or take it away from the skilled players. You can put it in here. I think at the upper end of talent level, you've got Matt Rao really fills this role, fills this position for his team, and Josh Dunkley is another one with a lot of quality that probably plays this defensive type role for Brisbane. Then you've got the more probably average type players that just fulfill that, just do a job for the team and keep the balance, keep the equilibrium going. And that's James Rowbottom. As I said, Willem Drew off the top, Jai Cordwell's another one, and George Hewitt as well, who just anchor that midfield really well for their teams. From a stats perspective, you're probably looking at something like around the 20 disposal mark, maybe just a tick under, about a 50% kicking ratio, so they're generally wanting to handball when they can. 6+ tackles, I think here is an absolute minimum. You want to be putting defensive pressure on, getting plenty of intercepts as well. And around 15 metres per disposal is probably usual. They're not someone that penetrates the field really well. There are a few exceptions to that, of course. Now, if teams aren't able to or don't have this exact player, they often manufacture it by using more engine midfielders, and they'll do the defensive work for them. I mentioned Freo off the top. I think they've got Brayshaw and Caleb Sarong, who both kind of occupy that engine type position, and Brayshaw does a lot of the tackling, does a lot of the defensive work in there, and even Hayden Young, who I said is a strike mid, he does a lot of the defensive pressure in there as well. I'll go through a couple of anomalies to this archetypal setup that I'm talking about here. I think the first one is probably Patrick Cripps, who I would say really is an engine midfielder because he doesn't have that high-end speed and explosiveness of a strike midfielder, but he does have enormous size and strength that most of the engine midfielders don't have, those smaller bodied engine midfielders. He plays like a smaller player, Patrick Cripps, but he is that big. And his size is a major point of difference for him. He kicks more goals than a lot of the regular type enduro engine mids. And he gets a lot more hard ball gets, more of that Jason Horne-Francis type, probably without the explosiveness. So I think Patrick Cripps is in somewhat the best type of endurance midfielder because he plays like an engine mid, like someone like a Caleb Sarong, but he's got that bigger size, just a few little extra things that he can add to the game, the goal scoring, the marking inside forward 50 that some of those guys don't have. The other one is Nick Dacos, who I would say is an engine mid as well, but he has that forward half game. He has that extra little bit of speed, explosiveness, but he is a small-bodied midfielder at heart. He's a guy that gets a lot of the loose balls at the contest, pounces on those players, and he's a high IQ player, but just has a few little extra things to his game, a even higher level of skill than some of those other players. So he's sort of somewhere between an engine and a strike midfielder there. And I think if we look at teams to go into these exceptions as well. I think you can look at the 2 grand finalists as options of not having these 3 archetypes in their midfield. I think Brisbane, they don't really have a strike midfielder as such. They've got Lachie Neale, Will Ashcroft, Hugh McCluggage, and Dunkley is probably the main ones. None of those, to me, are strike midfielders. They sort of have the defensive hybridy mid in Josh Dunkley. He sort of plays that engine/defensive role. They've got Will Ashcroft, who's an engine, Lachie Neale, who's an engine. McCluggage is really an engine. He's a little bit more physical, but they probably bring guys like Cam Rayner and Zach Bailey to be that strike player to just pinch hit a little bit. And Sydney, they have no engines at all, in complete contrast to Brisbane, who had all engines. They've got Heaney and Warner, who are both, I would say, strike midfielders. And then they use Rowbottom as that really, really defensive player. So he's ultra defensive to compensate for Warner and for Heaney. So they're a really interesting case study as well. Before we finish up, guys, I'm going to throw this one back to you. We've got a midfield heavy draft this year using my midfield archetypes, the strike mid, the engine, and the defensive mid. Which group do our draftees fit into? Your Jagger Smiths, your Josh Smileys, FinnO'Sullivan, Sam Lawler. Where do they fit? Let me know in the comments below. I want to thank once again Deakin University for jumping on board in the lead up to this year's draft. They are Australia's #1 university for sports science for the last 3 years running. I thank them and I see you guys next time.